Hey everybody, Chris here with Crisscross Crafts. Today's episode, we're putting in a SawStop. Of course, I ran into some roadblocks along the way, so if you want to see some tips and tricks on the install, if you get something like this, stay tuned and I'll walk you through it. Well, the first thing is there is a lot of boxes. And instead of just sitting here watching me unbox all day, thought I'd show just how much effort it took just to get the saw off the pallet and onto the mobile base. It literally is a Herculean effort. First off, the thing is greasy from, being packed. And secondly, it's heavy. So on the bottom, while I'm trying to figure out the right orientation for this mobile base, at the top left you can see I'm hoisting it up. And I thought the best plan of attack, instead of trying to tilt it off the base or off the pallet into the base, was to just pick it up. Every time I did, however, it would slip and hit side of the base and move the base. Couldn't keep that base still. Now for all the boxes. Step 1, free the motor from the zip ties and get it prepared, get everything out of the cabinet and start getting that all set up. I wanted to go ahead and get the mobile base fastened to the saw, which is a waste of time, you'll see later. But I did it anyway. Those are self-tapping screws, so they just go right into the cabinet base of the saw. Next, check out that hardware pack. I've assembled a lot of machinery, and no manufacturer is as good as this. Hardware was very clear, easy to use, easy to see, and literally ready to rock and roll. So from the inside of the cabinet, push the flange out so it could be screwed in. That'll be where the dust hose connects later. And giving it a good wipe down. Didn't take any chemicals or solutions, just wiped right off. Going to install the hand wheels, so according to the hardware chart, simply pop out the hardware from the hardware section. These do lock on with keyways, so it's real easy to identify and figure out exactly where they go. They are slightly different. Next up, the motor cover. My hands are still a little greasy from cleaning the top, so yeah, fumbled that. Easy to slip that rod right up from the bottom, and that locks everything in place. Now extension wings. I like to go ahead and get the hardware prepped, go ahead and get the washers on, so that way everything's ready to roll and I have to look for it when the time comes. And I'm just sort of manually getting a screw started on one side, and then I'll come back and tighten the other as I go. Little tip here. I just simply clamped a straight edge piece of wood there just to give me something flush to push that top up to, so the wing would be flush with the top. Worked out pretty well. Did that on both sides and just double check to make sure everything was going to be aligned in the middle. No problems there. Pushed it all the way up and then tightened those 2 bolts, and then came back and tightened the ones in the middle. Always seem to make faces. Next up, according to the hardware pack and the beautiful owner's manual, I'm going to mount that switch. It's got a couple of screws. This is a little tight. If you've got some type of Allen wrench that has a longer piece on it, that would have been helpful, but I didn't, so I made do with the Allen wrenches that came with the pack and got it in there. Quickly mounted the tool holder on the other side. Couldn't resist. Next, before I did anything else, I wanted to go ahead and make sure that the blade and the top were perfectly parallel to each other. So I made this little quick makeshift jig, and it worked pretty well. Gave me what I needed, and my customer happened to swing by, so I put him to work. Isn't that how it's supposed to be? This could have been done by myself, but it was helpful having 2 people there. That if you have the 52-inch fence, that certainly would have been helpful to have that extra hand. So I had him run around and do most of the work while I looked at the pretty color pictures in the owner's manual. Yeah, more boxes. Got the fence all ready to go, and well, he had to go too. So I whipped up this second jig, similar to the first, because I'd already torn it apart, but I needed this to be a little more accurate. So I fastened this little jig, made sure this was square, and I did put a little angle on the end originally, and in this case I did not need that angle. So I cut that piece trim flush and then put 2 little guides so it would ride in the track to help keep me parallel. Then my little indicator simply has got 2 screw locations on the bottom, and I just moved that and mounted that right to the very end. Moved the fence in, zeroed the gauge out, slid from the back to the front, or front to the back, whatever, and gave myself a little test. I was off a little, so I wanted to do a little adjustment on the fence to make that as accurate as I could. And these are fairly coarse threads. They do not take much. So using the wrenches that came in the kit, just give it just a little twist, and that pushes the side out just enough. And now, as you can see, dead on. I reset the jig in there just so you can get you a close-up, and you can see I'm at negative half a thousandth on both, which worked out pretty well. I noticed some rusting and some pitting, mostly because I was sweating during this time. So I did a quick cleanup with the Sandflex blocks from Klingspor's Woodworking shop, and hit that with the Lamaloop 3 to top coat that just to give it some protection, and that worked out pretty well. Wanted to give it a quick test before I did anything else to it. After it goes through the diagnostic phase, sorry about that ungodly air conditioner in the back. Anyway, it's a little short. The old saw was a little taller, so it messed up the height on the outfeed table. So what I did was I redneck engineered this little lift using a floor jack and my sawhorses and some 2x4 material. And I decided the easiest course of action, instead of cutting down my outfeed table and workbench, was to simply put a shim in the base of the saw. And that worked out pretty good. It needed about just about 3/4. So I'll put a piece of particle board in there, which was dead on 3/4. And then that took care of the height issue. And then I refastened the base to the saw off camera. And this took a little time getting it back down. I wanted to be very cautious not to just, slam it back down to the floor. But as you can see, everything fits flush and we're up and running. Now, off to the router table. So on this saw, because I got the left wing extension instead of the right, I did take a little modification. And it mounts right onto the left wing, which protrudes that out an additional 16 inches. Not a big deal. Well, since SawStop doesn't offer a insert for this thing, I did have to modify this Kreg insert that I bought that was actually designed to fit my Triton. Everything lined up perfectly. However, the screw holes, the locations that mount the insert to the table, did not. So I had to modify that. So I just simply used a scratch awl to make an indentation on the bottom of the plate. I used my thread checker to determine what the thread count would be, and then went and bought some hardware to make that work. And I don't know what this material is made of, but it is hard as a rock. Standard drill bit wouldn't even touch it. I mean, it just would not drill it at all. I wound up using a drill bit designed for metal, and it went through like butter. But it is a very tough material, whatever it is. So I drilled it from the back and then flipped it over and did a countersink on the front. That way I made sure that it didn't damage the front, and took me a little bit of time just to go a couple of times. I eased up on that to make sure that one, I didn't go too deep, and two, that the screw would sit below the surface of the plate. And I just used a standard countersink to do that. Put it in place, give it a little check. Elongate that hole just a little bit. That's the thing about modifying. Sometimes you get close and just tweak it just a little. Now there are set screws on the bottom mounted to the cast iron wing that I'm using, and I'm screwing from below to do minute adjustments to the plate to get it level at the top. And I'm just working my way around, all the way around the plate, to make sure that that is done correctly. And I did it with the screws out because I wanted to make sure that this was plenty heavy, but I did it with the screws out to make sure that, everything was going to be good and I wasn't going to be worried about, sinking that in later. So there you go. That is the SawStop with the router table, Triton installed. I updated that with the dust boot that I had on my previous system. Eventually I might get a lift, but for now, that's where it is. A lot more stuff to come. That's the old. I won't miss that router table. And there's the new. Love that overarm dust arm. That is fantastic. I made these spoil boards for my Axiom and I already had them glued up, and I oversized the MDF. So all I'm doing here is testing the router table just to flush trim the MDF to the Baltic birch. This also tests the dust collection, which, if you can see, there is very little, if anything, coming out. This is fantastic. I'll have more updates on the next video about what I did for the dust collection. Love this saw. Stay tuned for a review.